Good evening. Thanks for joining us on India Business Hour. I'm Shireen Bhan. The headlines that we're tracking for you this evening. India continues back-channel negotiations with US lawmakers with 2 weeks to go for the full 50% tariffs to kick in. India's US ambassador speaks to Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal after speaking with Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Both had sponsored a legislation proposing higher tariffs on India for buying Russian oil. India and China speed up efforts to rebuild bilateral ties. China's foreign minister is set to visit India next week. Both nations set to resume direct flights after 5 years. All of this comes ahead of Prime Minister Modi's scheduled visit to China later this month, the first in the last 7 years. European leaders hold talks with US President Trump ahead of his summit with Russia's President Putin. Ukraine, Zelensky, along with leaders from Britain, France and Germany, make a final diplomatic push to avoid ceding territory to Russia. The US applauds Pakistan on combating terrorism and promises to deepen bilateral cooperation. The joint statement comes nearly 4 months after the deadly terror attack in Pahalgam, which killed 26 people. Big boost for Paytm. RBI allows the company to operate as an online payment aggregator. The move effectively lifts the 2022 ban on onboarding new customers. Paytm shares perk up in trade. President Trump is considering 11 candidates to replace Jerome Powell as the Fed chair when his term expires in May next year. These include at least 6 current or former Fed officials, executives at Jefferies, BlackRock, among others. AI startup Perplexity offers to buy Google's Chrome web browser, makes an unsolicited bid of more than $34 billion, according to the Wall Street Journal. Google may have to sell Chrome as a part of an antitrust proceeding. Indian Olympics Association formally approves India's bid to host the 2030 Commonwealth Games at Ahmedabad. India's chances look bright after Canada pulls out of the race. Chief Justice B.R. Gavai says he will look into a plea against the Supreme Court's order on rounding up of stray dogs in Delhi NCR. The apex court had directed all stray dogs to be moved to shelters within 8 weeks, sparking concerns and protests. After opening its first store in Delhi, global furniture giant Ikea speeds up its India expansion plans. A special report coming up. Well, as always, the day's market action to start with. The Sensex and the Nifty regained yesterday's losses and ended the session near the day's high. The Nifty, in fact, reclaiming 24,600, closing at 24,619, up 131 points. The Sensex closing 300 points higher. The Nifty Bank adding 100 points and 356 higher there on the mid-cap index. Pharma, metal, auto stocks drove the Nifty higher today. That was the picture as far as the stock markets were concerned. In the currency market, the rupee strengthened to 0.25% after the dollar index hit a 2-week low on renewed hopes of a rate cut by the American Central Bank. The big story, with just 2 weeks for the 50% full tariffs to kick in, India continues to hold back-channel negotiations with US lawmakers. India's US ambassador has spoken to top US senators and has shared India's perspective on energy security. Parikshit is standing by now with details. Parikshit, a second very crucial meeting taking place with the senators who've essentially moved that tariff plan in the US. This has, of course, got bipartisan support. Take us through the meetings that our ambassador in the United States has had on the issue of energy security.
That's right. Ambassador Vinay Quatra, India's ambassador to US, is leading the outreach with top US politicians. Now, he's also spoken to Senator Chris Van Hollen. This is the third senator that Ambassador Quatra has spoken in the last few days to. He's also had conversation with Richard Blumenthal, who's a top Democrat senator, and also Lindsey Graham, who is a top Republican senator. What are these conversations essentially about? This is to create awareness about India energy ties and how India energy ties are only growing and will go further in the next few years. There was also a perspective shared about India's views on energy security and what India needs to do as a country which is import dependent when it comes to crude oil as well. Very significant to point out to our viewers that Democrat Senator Blumenthal and Republican Senator Graham were supporting a bill that proposed almost 500% tariffs on countries like China, India and Brazil, which buy Russian oil. And Senator Graham has gone on to say that India can play a big role in supporting President Trump's to end the war in Ukraine. Now, sources have been telling us that India's energy imports from US are up 70% year on year between January to June 2025, and this is roughly to the tune of $7 billion US dollars. This is likely to go up to over 14 billion US dollars this year or in this fiscal. This is what sources are also telling us. Also, India has been conveying that we're not the only recipient of Russian oil. There are other countries, almost 8 or 10 other countries, which continue to buy Russian fossil fuels. And Indian oil companies will be taking their decisions on energy purchases based on market prices. And as the discount levels for Russian crude comes down, there will be greater purchases of oil from other sources, including the United States. And India-US energy trade will be a robust pillar of the larger India-America relationship, which will continue to grow. So essentially, this is the message that the Indian government is conveying to its US counterparts and has also been conveyed by Ambassador Quatra in his meeting with top US lawmakers.
All right, so top US lawmakers meeting with our ambassador to the US, Vinay Quatra. 3 meetings have taken place, as Parikshit was pointing out. Many thanks for joining us, Parikshit. And amidst President Trump's trade war, India and China are speeding up efforts to rebuild bilateral ties. China's Foreign Minister WangYi is set to visit India next week and hold talks with the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. This comes ahead of Prime Minister Modi's scheduled visit to China later this month, the first in the last 7 years. Now, this will be a meeting of huge geopolitical significance. Ties between India and China had broken down after the border clashes in Galwan in June 2020. But there is an expectation that from September this year, there will be some stability and predictability in our engagement. India has restarted issuing tourist visas for Chinese nationals, this after 5 years. Meanwhile, reports have said that China has eased curbs on urea shipments to India and that Indian industry hopes China will ease the supply of specialty fertilizers as well. Former Niti Aayog CEO and G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant says it is in India's national interest to mend the bilateral relationship with China. He was speaking to me earlier this evening. Take a look.
I'm a believer that India needs to do joint ventures with China. India needs to do joint ventures for components. India needs to do joint ventures on a range of inputs which go into manufacturing. We need to bring down the input and component manufacturing right on strategically important. And I think we need to work with China and we need to really rework out the Press Note 3 to enable India to work with China to become a great manufacturing nation. The manufacturing must move from China to India. And for that, it's important that we work in our national interest.
Speed up the economic re-engagement. That's the message there from the former G20 Sherpa and the Niti Aayog CEO Amitabh Kant. And staying with India and China, they are set to resume direct flights after a 5-year gap. Now, more than 8 lakh passengers travelled between both nations in FY20. That's before the ban came in. This is just shy of the air traffic between India and the US, which stands at 11 lakh passengers in the same year. Madhya is standing by to take us through the significance of India and China resuming direct flights and what it could mean for the aviation industry and the economy at large. Madhya.
Well, before the suspension, the sky routes between India and China were very busy, and we have official data to validate that. In FY19 alone, 8.16 lakh passengers flew between India and China. It dropped to 7.7 lakh in FY20. Then COVID pandemic hit the world and air travel was suspended, with China being no exception. Then the Galwan border clash in mid-2020 worsened bilateral relations. And even after India resumed international air connectivity with most countries, flights to China remained suspended. But pre-COVID, if we compare traffic between India and China to India and United States, the difference is not much, as you mentioned. Around 11 lakh passengers between India and United States in FY20, as against 7.7 lakh passengers between India and China. And if you look at the cargo movement, China beats United States. 30,000 tons between India and China, as against 17,700 tons between India and the United States. As of 2019, India and China had 539 direct flights every month, and these were operated by Air India and Indigo from the Indian side and several other Chinese airlines. And in the last 5 years, since direct connectivity was suspended, passengers had to take alternate routes, like traveling to a third country like Hong Kong, Thailand and Singapore, and airlines like Thai Airways, Singapore Airlines, Cathay Pacific and others. So we know that the traffic and trade before the suspension was huge. So resuming direct flights will certainly see more demand.
Government is planning to open up to China also. So if they ask you to start, are you prepared for that?
You know, whenever the sort of bilateral arrangements between China and India were to enable flights, Indigo clearly is happy to start operating. Indigo was operating there prior to COVID. Indigo is known for its entrepreneurial spirit and exploring it. So if the governments were to come to an arrangement that the air travel would resume, clearly Indigo would be ready to do so.
Well, waiting for an official confirmation on the resumption of flights between India and China. The other big global story, European leaders will hold virtual talks with President Trump ahead of his summit with Russia's President Putin. Ukraine's President Zelensky will travel to Berlin to join German Chancellor Merz and other European leaders. Ahead of the call, President Trump has called EU leaders, I quote, great people who want a peace deal, end of quote. The EU leaders reiterate that no decision should be taken without Ukraine, including changing its borders by force. Remember, President Trump has said that both Kyiv and Moscow will have to cede land to end the war. Trump has also said that his meeting with Russia's Putin is, and I quote, a feel-out meeting to see what the Russian leader has in mind. The president hitting out at the media for what he called unfair coverage of his upcoming meeting with Russia's Putin. The White House has also called the meeting a listening exercise.
That a deal will emerge from this meeting, or is he simply going to listen?
I think this is a listening exercise for the president. Look, only one party that's involved in this war is going to be present. And so this is for the president to go and to get, again, a more firm and better understanding of how we can hopefully bring this war to an end.
A listening exercise. That's the White House on the Putin-Trump meeting, which is scheduled. Now, Russia has claimed to have captured more territory in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region. This comes soon after Ukrainian President Zelensky said that Russia wants Ukraine to withdraw from the entire region as part of a ceasefire deal. Meanwhile, Ukraine's military has said its drones hit an oil pumping station in Russia. Russian forces said it thwarted 185 Ukrainian aerial attacks in the last 24 hours. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar will visit Moscow next week, where he will meet his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov. In a social media post, the Russian ministry said that both the ministers will discuss key issues on their bilateral agenda, as well as key aspects of cooperation within international frameworks. The U.S. Department of Commerce, meanwhile, has initiated anti-dumping duty investigations into import of solar cells from India. Shares of Indian solar cell makers Vari Energies and Premier Energies fell following that news. The probe will also cover imports from Indonesia and Laos. This after U.S. solar manufacturers claimed that importers benefited unfairly from government subsidies. The U.S., meanwhile, has applauded Pakistan's efforts at combating terrorism and has promised to deepen bilateral cooperation. In a joint statement, both the US and Pakistan have reaffirmed their intention to work closely to promote effective and enduring approaches to counter-terrorism. Now, this statement comes nearly 4 months after the deadly attack in Pahalgam, which killed 26 Indian civilians. It also comes after 2 visits of the Pakistan Army chief to the US. Now, the Trump administration is considering 11 candidates to replace Federal Reserve Chief Jerome Powell when he retires next year. Steve Leesman is here with more on the process for selecting the next Fed chair. Steve.
CNBC has learned the Trump administration currently considering now 11 individuals, including 3 names that have previously not been disclosed, to replace Fed Chair Jay Powell when his term expires in May. According to 2 administration officials, the 3 new names include Jefferies chief market strategist David Zervos, former Fed Governor Larry Lindsey, and Rick Reeder, who is chief investment officer for fixed income at BlackRock. We now join a list of 8 other candidates that CNBC has confirmed are under consideration, including Fed Vice Chair for Supervision Mickey Bowman, Fed Governor Chris Waller, and Fed Vice Chair Philip Jefferson. Add to that NEC Director Kevin Hassett and former Fed Governor Kevin Warsh, mentioned by the president right here on Squawk Box. The officials described, quote, a deliberative process now taking place where Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will interview each of these candidates, winnow down a list, and then pass it along to the president for a final decision. The size of the list and the process described suggests a decision not imminent that could take a considerable amount of time, but the officials would not offer a timetable. The longer the process takes, though, the less likely there is to be a so-called shadow Fed chair in place approved by the Senate before Powell departs. Though sharply critical on an almost daily basis of Powell, President Trump has recently backed off suggestions he might replace the Fed chair before the end of his term. While many candidates on this list have advocated reform at the Fed, most have supported its independence. And
Steve, many thanks for joining us. Now, the Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee is preparing for a key internal reshuffle ahead of the October policy meeting. Executive Director Rajiv Ranjan is set to retire before the meeting. We learned from sources that RBI ED Indranil Bhattacharya is expected to replace Ranjan as the new internal MPC member. Further, the RBI is also likely to approve Bhattacharya's nomination as the new MPC member in the upcoming board meeting. So that's the MPC rejig expected. And staying with the Reserve Bank, the central bank has restored the certificate of registration of 2 NBFCs while cancelling the certificate of 16 others amid regulatory enforcement actions. This move will prohibit these entities from carrying out any NBFC-related activities in India. Additionally, 10 NBFCs have voluntarily surrendered their certificates of registration to the RBI, signalling an exit from the business itself. Shares of Paytm rallying in trade after a boost from the Reserve Bank of India. The RBI has granted an in-principle approval to operate as an online payment aggregator. This move effectively ends the ban imposed on Paytm in 2022 from onboarding new customers. Ritu's here with more. Ritu.
Well, after a near 3-year wait, the Reserve Bank of India has finally granted Paytm's 100% owned subsidiary, Paytm Payment Services Limited, in principle authorization to operate as an online payment aggregator. Now, that is essentially the business which runs Paytm's digital payment gateway for all of its merchants. But importantly, RBI has also lifted the ban on new online merchant onboarding, which had been in place since November of 2022. But to be clear, even when that ban was in place, Paytm had still been servicing the existing online clients, and it had also been signing up new offline merchants. But this, of course, clears a big regulatory cloud over the payment business. Now, the market is quite crowded. There are more than 50 players that have this license, but Paytm's massive base of 1.3 crore merchants does give it a strong shot at regaining momentum. The timing is also quite interesting. It comes just days after its Chinese investor Ant Fin fully exited Paytm, selling that remaining 5.8% stake. Now, remember, Paytm's initial application in 2022 was returned by RBI, and the company had reapplied for this license only in September last year after getting the government's nod for its downstream investment into PPSL. Keep in mind, though, that the RBI nod right now is not unconditional. The company will have to complete a system and cybersecurity audit within 6 months' time and submit the report to RBI or risk losing the license. Now, brokerages have given the move a thumbs up. Citi says the license win is positive for sentiments because it lifts a major regulatory restriction on the business and it will help Paytm be more competitive than before. And Bernstein adds that this will have limited immediate impact on metrics, but it is a major relief nonetheless and is going to support higher payment margins for the company over time.
All right, good news there coming in for Paytm. Ritu, many thanks. Shares of IndusInd Bank, meanwhile, under pressure. This after Mumbai's Economic Offences Wing launched a preliminary inquiry into the alleged accounting lapse. The complaint was filed by the IndusInd Bank management. Speaking to CNBC TV18, officials from Mumbai's Economic Offences Wing said that they had recorded statements from staff members linked to the offices of the bank's former CFO. Also said that the bank's senior officials, including CEO Sumant Katpalia, will be summoned in due course to record statements. That's the latest, the stock down by about 1%. Market regulator SEBI has banned former DHFL promoters Kapil Vadhavan and Dheeraj Vadhavan, along with 4 others from the markets for up to 5 years. SEBI has also imposed a fine of 120 crore rupees on the 6 individuals for committing financial irregularities, diverting funds and fabricating books. This order follows an interim order issued in 2020 imposing restrictions on the Vadhavans. The Goods and Services Tax Appellate Tribunal has penalised a Subway franchisee in Pune for alleged profiteering gains. The franchisee has been directed to deposit 5.5 lakh rupees into the consumer welfare funds of the centre and the Maharashtra government. It would also have to pay this amount along with an interest of 18% within 3 months. The case involved allegations that the franchisee failed to pass on the benefits of a GST rate reduction on restaurant services. Now, the Parliament has passed the new income tax bill, which will come into force from the 1st of April 2026. The new bill will replace the 6-decade-old Income Tax Act. Timsy is standing by to explain the key changes in the new legislation that you need to keep in mind. Timsy.
The Modified Income Tax Bill 2025, a landmark piece of legislation poised to replace the 6-decade-old Income Tax Act 1961, offers more clarity and makes the rules and laws simpler for taxpayers. To begin with, what changes for the individual taxpayers? Earlier, during search and seizure actions, officers were entitled to inspect or seize physical books of accounts, digital devices, etc. But now, officers can access emails, social media profiles, accounts, or any other books, documents in any electronic format. Also, officers can now access passwords, privacy codes. This rule did not exist in the previous Income Tax Act of 1961, but was introduced later on when digital records became a reality. So these rules were not explicitly said in the Act, and now it has been clarified in the new Act itself. Up next, a big relief for taxpayers in terms of claiming refunds. Earlier, the Act had a clause which blocked refunds on belated or late filed returns. But now, refunds will be allowed on returns which have been filed late, which gives a benefit to the taxpayers. So the new income tax bill is not just a relief for individual taxpayers. Here are some highlights for the corporate taxpayers too. First up, on beneficial ownership. Earlier, there were test conditions at level of ultimate owner of shares, and now the bill has removed the ambiguity and gotten a clarity for beneficial ownership in line with the Income Tax Act of 1961. The IT bill released on 13th Feb had brought in alternate minimum tax for LLPs, where capital gains tax had been mentioned at 18.5%. But in the revised version passed by the Parliament yesterday, this has been clarified and reinstated at 12.5% rate of capital gains tax for LLPs, just at par with existing Income Tax Act of 1961.
Timsy, many thanks. Changes in the new income tax law. Up next on India Business Hour, AI startup Perplexity offers to buy Google's Chrome web browser, makes an unsolicited bid of more than $34 billion. That and more on India Business Hour. Catch all of CNBC TV18's news and updates on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, X and Jio Hotstar. The Supreme Court continues to hear a batch of pleas challenging the special intensive division of electoral rolls in Bihar. Petitioners arguing that every voter has a statutory right to remain on the list, calling it a battle between constitutional entitlement and constitutional right. The petitioners also reminded the court that it has promised to step in if there was mass exclusion of voters. The hearing will continue tomorrow. Meanwhile, Justice B.R. Gavai, the Chief Justice, has said that he will look into the plea against the Supreme Court's order on rounding up of stray dogs in Delhi NCR. Remember, the Supreme Court had directed the Delhi government to round up stray dogs and put them in shelters. This order was given on the 11th of August, but it has not been published so far. The order sparked mixed reactions, with animal rights activists asking for the order to be reversed and a large section of the public supporting the court's decision. The big global story: AI startup Perplexity has made an unsolicited offer to acquire Google's Chrome browser for $34.5 billion. As per Wall Street Journal, this figure is higher than Perplexity's current valuation of $18 billion. The company has several investors, including large venture capital funds, that have agreed to back this transaction in full. Dan Murphy is here with more. Dan, a big deal in the making.
AI startup Perplexity has made a long-shot offer to buy Google's Chrome browser for $34.5 billion. Venture investors have proposed funding the deal, according to the company. It comes after the Department of Justice suggested Google divest Chrome, its flagship search browser, as part of an antitrust suit the company lost last year. That ruling said Google had illegally monopolized the search market. The unsolicited bid by Perplexity is higher than the AI startup's current valuation, which is estimated to be around $18 billion. Perplexity has seen rapid growth, climbing from a $500 million valuation at the start of 2024 to where it is now, after at least 5 capital raises. CNBC understands there's no current Gulf sovereign wealth investments in Perplexity. It was reported by PitchBook that Qatar's QAA was a backer, but we have not been able to independently confirm that investment yet. In April 2025, Perplexity's CEO said the search engine was serving approximately 30 million users. It has received backing from investors including Nvidia, SoftBank's Vision Fund 2, VC firms New Enterprise Associates and IVP, as well as Amazon founder Jeff Bezos and Meta's Jan LeCun. Perplexity is best known for its AI search engine, a potential Google challenger that gives users simple answers to questions and, unlike many other AI search engines, links out the original source material. Last month, it launched its own AI-powered browser called Comet.
Well, that's Dan Murphy there reporting on Perplexity's unsolicited bid for Google's Chrome web browser. President Trump has mocked Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon, saying that he made a bad prediction about the impact of his tariff policies on the markets. In a post on social media, Trump said that Solomon and Goldman Sachs refused to give credit where credit is due. He added that Solomon made a wrong prediction and he should get a new economist or just focus on being a DJ. That because David Solomon does DJ on his time off. Now, his comments came after a note by Goldman Sachs said that American consumers will bear the brunt of Trump's tariffs. Swedish furniture giant Ikea has opened its first city store in Delhi. Shivani Bazar's reports on Ikea's expansion push in India.
Well, Ikea has a brand new store, a city store they're calling it, in Delhi. We are standing here in the new Ikea in Pacific Mall, Tagore Garden. And to speak more about this and Ikea's future plans, we have the people themselves, Patrick and Suzanne. Thank you so much for joining us here on CNBC TV18. Let me begin by asking you, Suzanne, how do you feel about this? And what is Ikea's strategy basically about these city stores? We saw last year that Ikea made its entry into North India. How has that been going and what role does this play?
I am immensely proud to open the door with the first store in the Delhi region. And it's a city store, but it's the first in a long row of more stores to come. And as you said, we opened the online business half a year ago, and we have now a good sense of what the Delhiites live. So we can further meet them here, and they can come and physically experience our products and solutions. So we are very happy to be here today.
Two big stores coming up in Delhi NCR. The North India market looks up for Ikea. What is the expectation? Is there an expectation, a ballpark figure for sort of what is the kind of plan when it comes to revenue growth, profits? Is there something that you have in mind?
We can say that Delhi is most likely the biggest home furniture market in India, and hence the expectations are very, very high over time. Okay. We have started in one way, which is the online. We're complementing it with various formats, and we will see a quite rapid growth, I believe. So we have much more capacity to do, so we can meet many more of the Delhiites. We don't have a ballpark number to give you, but it's expected to be by far one of the biggest 1 to 2 markets in India for us.
Well, that's Ikea on its expansion plans in India, and they do have a new global CEO, Jesper Brodin, stepping down after 8 years at the helm, and Juvensu Maitsu taking over as the new global CEO of Ikea. But with that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of India Business Hour. The news will continue. Stay tuned to CNBC TV18. We've got plenty more lined up for you. Thanks for watching.